Good evening and welcome to the Strand. I'm Christina Foxley, the Director of Events, and I'm so pleased to welcome award-winning photographer Joel Meyerowitz here tonight to discuss his latest work, Legacy, the Preservation of Wilderness in New York City Parks. This historic publication defines an important moment, as Meyerowitz is the first photographer to document New York City's parks since the 1930s, when they were photographed as part of Franklin D. Roosevelt's WPA program. This compelling body of work is the result of a unique commission Meyerowitz received from the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation to document, interpret, and celebrate one of New York City's greatest legacies, the nearly 9,000 acres of parks in the 5 boroughs that have been left or returned to their most natural state. An exhibition of this series is on view now at the Museum of the City of New York through March 7th, 2010. I encourage you to go see it. Following his presentation, Joel would be happy to take your questions. I'll be walking around with a wireless microphone, so please wait for that before you speak. And then he'll sign copies of his book for you, which you can purchase downstairs on your way out of the store. Please join me in welcoming the self-described urban Huck Finn, Joel Meyerowitz, to the Strand.
The urban Huck Finn. I like that. Oh, thank you. You told me not to forget this. Okay. Thank you all for coming. It's really nice to see such a crowd here. If you all bought a book, the Strand would be very happy. The publisher would be happy. My mother, if she was still alive, she would be happy. Back in 2001, after the tragic events of 9/11, I found myself wanting to be useful, to be helpful in a way that most of us couldn't be because we were kept out of that forbidden city below Chambers Street. You think that fixed it better? Okay. I'll try. You can hear me. Oh, that's really good. Anyway, I managed to get inside Ground Zero and work in there for 9 months, and felt for the first time since my work back in the 70s during the Vietnam War that I was doing something of some social utility. And it was really meaningful to me. And I felt after that work that I wanted to do something else, and I didn't know what would be next. As it is, things like that don't just make themselves known right away. There has to be some kind of interaction with chance or events that produce this possibility. And along comes Commissioner Adrian Benepe. Actually, he was the guy who was basically influential in getting me into Ground Zero. He was, at the time, the commissioner just of the borough of Manhattan's parks, and I knew him from childhood, from his childhood, because his father, Barry Benepe, founded the Green Market. And back in the 70s, when he did that, I photographed the green markets for him. So I had this connection with Adrian, and Adrian was able to get me a worker's pass, and with that pass I got into Ground Zero. I then scanned and fabricated that pass so I could stay in week after week until I finally got some somewhat more legitimate access to Ground Zero. So it was to my surprise when 3 years later, Adrian called me up and said, you know, we don't have any record of these parks. We're still using pictures from the Depression. How would you like to go and make, you know, a body of work that would archive our assets? Well, it seemed like a good idea, and in a way, it felt to me like a kind of balance for the work I did in Ground Zero, which was about the tragedy and the ultimate recovery. This work seemed to be, or have the potential to be, about the beauty, the innate beauty and gift that the parks offer us as urban dwellers. So I said, okay, I take a look. And I went to a number of parks, and I could see that making photographs about swimming pools and playgrounds and the buildings in all of the various parks and the entrances and the bike paths and all that stuff didn't really need me to do it. That there was something else to photograph there. Now, I'll show you a picture. We could take the lights down now if you want. Look at that. I found myself one day up in Inwood Park at the very top of the Palisades on our side of the Hudson, and I was deep in the woods, and the woods up there are not first growth trees. They were all chopped down during the Revolutionary War, but many of the trees are from that period. They've grown back since then. So they're, 250 years more old. And walking through the woods, I spied a little man in red sitting at the base of a tree reading a book. And I have to say, it's such an innocent act, but it stunned me. He wasn't sitting on a bench down below by the water. He had walked up to the, literally hiked up to the top of this Palisades and found himself a secluded spot until I intervened and probably upset his harmony. But it reminded me of paintings from the Hudson River School in the 19th century, those great romantic paintings that still showed the East and the West. A lot of those Hudson River School painters went out west. And they had this kind of sublime quality of tiny figures in big landscapes, the sort of primitive, primeval landscape of that period. And I thought, oh, there's a connection here. And then, by absolute chance, one day later, I went out to Queens to photograph some parks out there. This was just a feeling moment, like, is this something I want to do? Is there anything here for me to do? And I found myself in this pine forest in Forest Park. It was so still, and it smelled so good. And I could hear what sounded like water rushing by in the distance. It was Flushing Boulevard. But it sounded like water. And I accepted it as water because the picture of the guy reading and this picture of these woods gave me the sense that the real body of work that was opening itself to me were these areas of wilderness, of places that either were set aside by benign neglect, that the city parks department doesn't have the money to care for these places, or by intent, because they do have some parks that they put aside and they call them forever wild. And there's about 8,000 acres of that land. There's 29,000 acres of New York City parkland and another 30,000 acres of state and national parkland. And this may shock you, but 26% of the 5 boroughs is parkland. 26%. That's a quarter of our land mass is actually green. And Adrian Beneby, the commissioner, says that he thinks we're the greenest city in the world. Kind of astonishing for a vertical city with the kind of density we have. Anyway, I went back to Commissioner Beneby and said, okay, I want to do this, but I only want to focus on the wilderness. And he said, it's yours. Do what you wish. I said, okay, I'm going to give you a budget because it's going to take a year or two to do this. I gave him a budget, and he was shocked. He choked on the budget, and he said, we don't have any money. I said, but you asked me to do this. How can I make this project if you don't have any money? He said, well, surely you can raise some money for this. Does that sound like the city or what? So I went out, and it took 1 year. That's how projects work. It took a